What is going on, YouTube? I am back with another live stream. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you are brand new here to the channel, make sure y'all go ahead and hit that subscribe and that like button. It really helps me stay motivated to put this content out for y'all.
You see me on live?
We are live right now, and today I'm not going to actually be diving into any articles or anything specific in terms of like headlines and the news and things like that, or even videos. Today, I specifically want to focus on people who are just now getting into a tech career or who are looking to transition into their first job in tech, or even if you're already on your second job or third job, just anybody who is considered early in their tech career right now. I just want to take this time in this stream to kind of talk about 12 mistakes that I think you should try to avoid as best as possible making early in your tech career. So these are things that I either have experienced myself or I have encountered them in like work situations with coworkers and things like that. So they've either happened to me personally or I've seen the outcome of someone else doing this in my in my career. So that's pretty much the gist of the stream tonight, man. So I don't plan to be on too long, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, and hopefully y'all just find this packed with hopefully valuable information that you can take with you and incorporate, whether you're in a coding boot camp right now or you're trying to get your first job in tech. These are things that I think a lot of people aren't really talking about. They can help you make the most out of your early tech career. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the very first skill that I think, or I'm sorry, the very first mistake that I think people should try their best to avoid early on in their tech career is neglecting soft skills and just not taking soft skills very seriously, because I know soft skills gets floated around a lot just as a term, but they are really important because at the end of the day, not everything is technical. Like, of course, we do a lot of technical things, and a lot of times you're solving technical problems, of course, but you are working with people at the end of the day, and you also have a really good chance, depending on what your role is in tech, of not exactly working with technical people all the time. So there will be times where you'll have to either explain something or interface with people from other parts of the business that might not exactly speak technical language. So, being able to think logically and algorithmically and programmatically, like that's very important. But there's always a time and a place, right, to know when to sort of show another side of your communication style. And a lot of times, if you're interacting with other parts of the business that aren't technical, you definitely want to have strong soft skills so that people enjoy working with you. And even if it's, let's say you're an engineer and you are just working with mainly, product people, VPs of like engineering, CTOs, and other developers, people who basically speak your language, people still want to work with somebody that they enjoy working with, that they enjoy being around. So I cannot stress enough how important it is to actually focus on soft skills. And I think it be a lot of people feel like it's something that you can learn, and that's kind of tough. Like, I'm not saying you can't learn soft skills, but it's more of something that you work on improving versus, I would say, learning. Like, you have to be comfortable in your own communication style. You have to be comfortable in the way that you talk non-technical things with other people. So I get it. Sometimes people are type A and they just want to think programmatically. They just want to think in software terms, which is totally fine. But again, I just think that in terms of your sense of humor and how you relate to people and how you connect with other people that you work with, that is something that I think is less learned as it is practiced. So I think, this whole point about neglecting soft skills, I just think people don't spend enough time really thinking about that part of their job as opposed to just doing the technical part of their job really well. I've even seen people who are incredibly, incredibly smart, like the some of the best engineers that I've ever had a chance to work with or alongside of, actually lose their job just because they were very tough to work with on the soft skill side. And again, I don't know how often that's actually brought up or talked about, but again, like I've actually seen this happen before where, a person is really abrasive or like everything is very combative and they don't know how to, even if you disagree with somebody, there's a way to go about disagreeing with them, right? There's a way to bring things up, especially when you're talking about leadership and management. You definitely want to massage the way that you bring up certain concerns or issues, when dealing with people who are above you on the org chart. So all that kind of relates to just navigating your style of soft skills and how you actually use your soft skills in communication. So that's a really big one that it might seem like a minor thing or a very small or secondary thing, but it goes a really long way, especially in the hiring process as well too. If you're trying to get a job, like, yes, people want to know that you're competent and capable of doing the technical piece and the harder part of the job, but at the same time, people want to enjoy people that they work with, and they want to feel like you're going to, make people potentially feel good or be good to be around and be a positive energy or a positive addition really to the team and to the company. So again, just don't sleep on this side of your skill set. So soft skills is a really big one. So that was the first one. um the next one we're going to jump into is ignoring networking opportunities. And this is another one that I think gets watered down a lot as people talk about it, right? Because people will say, oh, always be networking or go to networking events. And I run into people all the time who say they have a hard time with networking and really just understanding what that means. And it's true that you really are always networking. Like every interaction that you have with somebody in many ways is networking. And I really would even argue that it's relationship building more so than just networking, because networking comes off very transactional. And I think sometimes people like to think about the fact that, okay, I know this person, or I worked with this person, or I met this person one time, and so now let me go ask them for something, let me go ask them for a favor, let me go ask them to introduce me to somebody else, or to help me find a job, or like give me a recommendation for something, but you haven't really spent any time building a relationship with that person, right? So personally, I feel like networking opportunities are always happening with every single interaction that you have with a given person, that you really want to make sure that, again, like not only are you a pleasant person to be around, but you're also offering value whenever that you can. And like I said, just not being transactionally focused. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about networking, is that you're just out to get something from somebody, or somebody's job is just to help you, which I don't think that's the case at all. So it's really about a relationship and building those relationships, and taking the time to actually invest in networking opportunities are really important to your career, especially early on, because again, you're going to always need people who are speaking highly of you when you're not around. So you're going to need people to actually, in a way, vouch for you, right? In those rooms that you might not have access to early in your career. You might not be a part of certain leadership decisions or conversations that are happening. And so you need somebody who is actually on your side in that room, speaking highly about you, in order for you to see whatever sort of progression in your career or title changes or whatever it is that you're looking for, more responsibility in your role. You definitely need allies to make that happen. And you're always building these allies and working on these relationships, right? So it's not just going to networking events after work. It's not just going to online or virtual networking events. It's all the things, right? So if, depending on your company culture, if people are hanging out after work, or if they have things that they like to do together, whether it's like golfing. I've heard of like Dungeon and Dragons clubs and things like that. Now, I'm not saying go drink the Kool-Aid and just be a part of something you're not interested in, but I am saying that relationship building process is always happening, whether you're at work or off the clock. You're still investing in relationships with other people. And so just being aware of that, and not just being too specifically work focused, meaning like your output, which of course is like a huge deal, but you also want to be working on the relationships that you're building with the people that you work with, because you just never know, right? And like I said, it's a relationship, it's not just transactional. So also focusing on that it actually is a two-way reciprocal relationship, and not just trying to get something from somebody, or get information from them, or get mentorship from them, but never really returning any sort of favor, um and reciprocating. So yeah, ignoring networking opportunities, I think, is a really big one, that you don't want that to happen to you early in your career, because you never know also when You can meet somebody at one job who ends up leaving that job before you, and then they go somewhere else, and you just never know. They might end up pulling you into a job down the road. I've had that happen to myself personally before. So it's just really good to work on being a relationship oriented person and investing in those relationships with pretty much everybody that you work with, not just your managers or higher ups or executives, but also your peers and, people in other departments as well. You just never know when and how you end up crossing paths with people again down the road, either in a job or in a different role. So, yeah, make sure you don't ignore networking opportunities. All right, so that's two down so far. Got a couple more, so hope y'all are hanging with me. Um, the next one is not continuing to learn, which is a really big one because I think that people think that getting the job is pretty much the battle, right? Like once you get the battle's over. You can put that on your resume, and you're gonna get the experience, and you're gonna be good to go from there, right? You just sit down at the job, you just do the work, and you'll build your resume that way. You'll have experience from the real world and a real job that you can reference and relate to, and you'll have people to give you uh, references and recommendations when you go to another job, and then basically you're good. All the hard work is behind you once you actually get the job, and I would just argue that's definitely not the case, right? So continuing to learn, especially in a tech job, is going to be the hugest or one of the biggest things that I can highly recommend. And it's definitely a mistake that you don't want to make by getting into your job and just sitting down and getting used to just doing your role and just doing what's asked of you, right? So there's a lot of ways to continue learning. A lot of jobs will typically have some sort of learning management system or LMS that they use to actually encourage employees to go increase their skill set. So it could be something like Pluralsight or like LinkedIn Learning or Udemy. So those are always ways like great ways to take courses to learn additional things and work on stuff on the side. But at the same time, nothing beats real world, real life experience or projects. So if you're a developer or if you do anything with the engineering side of tech, right? So you're doing DevOps, you're doing QA, you're doing developer, you're doing UI, UX. All of those roles could really greatly benefit from side projects or real world projects, whether that's a project that you just do for fun or something that you actually go out and participate like in a hackathon or some sort of event, or you help a nonprofit or you help a business, build something, do something. Doesn't have to even be anything super extravagant. I mean, of course, it's helpful if you learn something new from the project, but you don't have to kill yourself, is what I'm saying, with in terms of energy, time, hours, things like that. It can be done sort of just in whatever downtime, free time, nights, weekends that you have available to you. But the whole point is that you actually are out putting your skills to the test with real world scenarios, right? So you want to be able to speak towards different problems that you encounter with different types of businesses, different types of people that you've worked with, different types of scenarios. And that's why I said hackathons are great, because typically they're like a definitive period of time. So you've got like 1 day, 2 days, a weekend, or maybe a week at the most, right, to work on a hackathon project. But you're working with a real group of people. You're working towards a real problem against a real deadline. You're going to have to make real technical decisions based on those constraints that you have. And those things, whether they go good, they go bad, they offer you a learning experience that you can actually relate to in real life. And you can actually refer to that, and it shows to you, at least on your resume and to future employers, that you are proactive. You're always looking for ways to sort of get experience with things, right? I mean, even a side project is helpful, but like I said, I think the more that you can get real world experience working with other people is probably the most valuable thing that you can get. Now, if you can figure out a way to make it like a side hustle and actually get paid for it, then it really becomes a win-win, because you get to learn, you get the experience, and you also get paid. But at the same time, like I said, I think the most important thing is that you're doing things outside of work, that you're continuing to learn in whatever capacity that is for you. There's a lot of different ways, depending on your role, that you can actually get that experience. But even if it's getting more familiar with the tools that you use in your job, right? So you might use something like Jira for work, but you might not really get into the nuts and bolts of like all the different things you can do with Jira just in your day-to-day job function. So spending time in, let's say, a side project, but you organize it in Jira and you actually try to use all the features that Jira offers you, and you learn more about different things inside of Jira, then again, that's continuing to learn. That's continuing to increase your skill set, increase your value, increase your experience. So getting the job is the hard part for sure, but it isn't the end of the road where you can kind of just sit back and chill after that. I would even say use getting the job as a starting point, because from there on, you definitely want to stay competitive for the next job that you get. A lot of us aren't interested in making less money. We want to make more money. So you'll find that the easiest way to make more money and to stay um, sort of in a job secure role is definitely to increase your value in that role, and that you do that by increasing your experience, the things you know, things you've been exposed to, the things you've worked on, right? So continuing to learn is a huge one that I think a lot of people sort of forget about or don't really think about as much once they get into their role. They're kind of focused on the fact that they made it, they're in tech now, and yeah, they're just enjoying the benefits, right? Whether it's PTO, the pay, whatever it is, the sort of autonomy that comes with maybe working remotely and things like that. But they forget to, keep putting in the same amount of time, grind, energy, and effort into continuing to learn and building on their existing skill set. So that is another big one that you don't want to miss out on, which kind of ties into the next one I had, which was a lack of side projects or real world experience. So like I said, those two kind of tie in together. So I won't spend too much time on this one, but essentially it's the same thing, just not having something to increase your skill sets outside of work. Whether, like I said, it could be a passion project, it could be helping a friend out with their business, or something they need help with technically, right? And this could go for any role. You can almost find a way to get real world practical experience in every single role, whether you're a scrum master, project manager, product manager, like I said, developer, QA, all these roles have ways that you can get involved with real world projects or real world experience and actually be able to, go into something with maybe not as much knowledge or information, but be able to come out of it with experiences you can talk about, you can build from, you can learn from, and you're doing it kind of in low stress situations because it's not your actual job where you're taking certain risk and learning certain things or making certain mistakes, right? So at least when you encounter them in your job, you'll have some sort of reference to what you did the first time you encountered that problem, and whether it did or didn't work for you. You have more experiences to kind of pull from and relate to in your job, and so you're not just getting all your experience on the job. So that's pretty much all with that, and I won't beat a dead horse too much with that. So another big one we had, number five, is overlooking documentation. Because as I'm sure a lot of y'all will find, like when you get into tech and you start working in whatever role or capacity, because this even happens with like technical writers, people who don't have necessarily hands on the keyboard writing code doing engineering work, but this affects everybody. It can affect me as a product person, it can affect QAs or pretty much anybody who's new to onboarding at the company or trying to learn a software. Overlooking documentation as you work or as you're a part of something, creating a process, developing a process, like everything for the most part within a company needs to be documented. Like I'm not saying that it needs to be documented to, the craziest degree of detail, but you'll find that there's a lot of times when, like I said, new hires or people need a refresher on something, and they need a way to like just quickly at a glance understand something, whether it's a feature in a software, whether it's a process, whether it's a template for how something is currently done, a bulleted point list of things that are important for a certain process, definitions of things. It could be like acronyms that you use throughout the company that a lot of people just don't commonly know. So what I'm saying is that it doesn't really matter what role you work in. This is not just for engineers. Like if you're a part of something that is important or that will be important for other people to know, which typically a lot of things are in a company, then documenting things and becoming really good at that is a skill set all in itself, honestly, because like I said, whether it's process flows, like in a certain part of your department, how something works. It doesn't really matter what it is. A lot of things require documentation in some sort of shared knowledge base. And a lot of companies are either behind on documentation, meaning they don't have it at all, they don't have enough of it, or it's really out of date. So getting good at this process of actually creating documentation is really important. And like I said, this isn't just for engineering folks. This is for pretty much anybody working within a tech organization. People will appreciate somebody who takes really good notes or takes really good or creates really good documentation or creates really, easy to understand process charts or process flows. So that entire process is really important because you could have a huge impact on your particular team or your particular department just by, either documenting really outdated processes or updating documents that are really outdated, or just again being the reliable person who creates really good documentation that everybody can easily understand. Like those are really really helpful tools and skills that can almost positively impact any role within tech in a tech company. So make sure you don't sleep on that, because I think a lot of people actually do on that one. So that was number 5 right there. uh Avoiding or overlooking feedback. So now we're going to jump to number 6. So we're getting halfway through the list here, about 20 minutes into the stream. So making good time. So avoiding feedback is another really big one that I think a lot of people probably don't take as seriously as they should when they first get started in tech. Let me take a sip of water real quick. So the problem with this one is that most companies are going to have dedicated time for you to get feedback, give feedback to others, or something along those lines. Most importantly, they're probably going to have you actually receiving feedback from like a manager or somebody that you report to or somebody within your team. And the goal isn't to always have this like happy go lucky positive conversation that just reinforces how great you're doing, right? Like even if you're doing an incredible job at your job, your manager or whoever is responsible for this kind of feedback session is definitely going to be encouraged, probably by their leaders and the company at large, to, still find opportunity areas to bring up to you that you can improve on. So it's not to say that you're bad or you're doing bad work or anything like that, but a lot of companies want to see, quarter over quarter, year over year improvement in their employees, right? And so these check-ins where you receive feedback are typically for that very reason. They're there to help you sort of see the blind spots that you might not be as aware of as somebody else that works with you, and just help you really strengthen those areas. Not so much to punish you or to like make it a awkward conversation or to like get you fired or anything like that, but in the sake of just all of us personally and professionally improving at our jobs and our roles. There's a lot of different things that we'll be good at, but then there'll also be things that we'll have as opportunity areas. And so, avoiding that sort of feedback or not being open to it, being closed minded or being resistant to feedback or taking it super personally, like those can be things that really hurt your career early on, because being able to adapt and receive feedback and act on it and implement it really shows that you're coachable, you're flexible, right? And it goes back to sort of just the soft skills piece of like, what is it like to actually work with you as a coworker? So people want to be around people who can actually not only, positively receive feedback, but also who can act on it and use that to become even better of a teammate, coworker, colleague. So being open and receptive to feedback and then being able and willing to actually act on that feedback are really, really, again, they might seem small, but they're really big things that can help you take your career a long way, especially early on when you haven't really necessarily maybe proven yourself in the company yet. And at that point, people are still looking to see how committed are you to the company, how committed are you to your role and getting better and things like that. So being able to take that feedback that you receive and positively act on it and incorporate it into your job really can show, again, that dedication to your job, your role, the company, and getting better. Because again, people want to build trust with you. All goes back to like building rapport and networking and building relationships with people, right? So trust is a huge part of any relationship. And so this is, you can think of it as one of the ways that people can trust that, again, you're not going to take things super personally or take it to heart, get upset, hold grudges because somebody gave you feedback or suggested something that you do differently. You have to just look at it as an area or an opportunity for you to get better and be more valuable to the team, to the company. But then also too, just be able to have discernment where, I'm not going to say everybody who gives you feedback is always coming from a great place, right? There might be times where you really do get upset or you feel like somebody doesn't have, the greatest side. I'm saying that it's incumbent upon us as the employees, the teammates, the colleagues, the coworkers to be able to discern what type of feedback we really should take and incorporate and listen to, and be able to be objective and understand how that feedback could make us a better teammate for people that we work with. So just something to keep in mind, not brushing off feedback like something that's like personal or that's not important, but being able to be objective about it, receive it, listen to it, and act on it. Really, really helpful skills that a lot of people overlook early in their careers. So where are we at? I was number 6. I hope y'all are finding this helpful, man. If you're just coming into the stream, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It helps me stay motivated to put this content out for you guys. Yeah, man. It's Tuesday stream going on here.
You see me on live.
And let's keep it rolling. Let's see what we have here. Number 7. So we've got ignoring company culture. Now I get why this one can be hard for some people, because especially if you're introverted, like if you're just not if you're not into, like, I'll say, being a follower, because in a lot of cases that might be what it feels like, to really embrace and take part of a company culture that you might not necessarily feel like is the best fit for your personality. So there are times where people might want to have tons of different like company outings and after work things. And there could be stuff like, I mean, all sorts of like unrequired activities, either during work or after work hours that people do just to socialize or whatever the case might be. But it might be considered a part of just the way people are for the most part within that company. And I get it. I've been in that position before. I definitely understand the hesitancy, the reluctancy to get involved with it. So I think this is definitely part of knowing yourself, as a person, professionally and personally, and what type of company culture you prefer to be around. Now, early in your tech career, right, your first couple jobs, or before you really build up a lot of experience, you might have a hard time actually finding companies that have a company culture that you might necessarily value or align with, right? So you might be in a position early on where you're just really trying to land your first job and you're not really being that I would say like choosy or selective about certain things that it comes down to with a company. You might be in a position where you just don't have multiple offers to really weigh between, right? So there's like a number of reasons why I can see why people don't necessarily do this one all the time. But again, I do think that once you accept the job, you got to understand that there is some company culture that comes with it, right? And so some companies are a lot more involved and more committed to a certain type of company culture than others. But again, there's usually going to be some idea of a company culture that people are expected to embody in terms of like values and the way people actually carry themselves, interact with others. So when I say this, I'm just saying that don't ignore company culture completely, because to some degree that is going to impact the perception that other people have of you, whether it's leadership or your coworkers. And for better or worse, within each company there is a sort of standard of being and operating that's kind of expected to some degree. So the less you partake in company culture, or the less you embrace it, I should really say, the more you kind of create a target on your back as not being a great fit for the company, even though you might be doing a great job in your role and in your job function. But again, if you're not fitting sort of that mold or criteria that people are looking for, either socially or from a value perspective, or the way you actually approach work and approach your colleagues and opportunities at work, then again I think that that's a very easy way to make yourself a target, basically. So ignoring company culture can create other unintended negative side effects for you and your career that you probably don't want. You're probably not interested in making your life harder to navigate with leadership and management and things like that. But ultimately, that's something that kind of going too far against the grain in terms of company culture can definitely make your life more difficult than better for you, basically. So just something to keep in mind. Not saying that you got to, like I said, drink all the Kool-Aid and do all the things, but it is something to just keep in mind while you are at a certain company. So what was that? It's number 7. Cool. So let's move on. We got number 8, which is being afraid to make mistakes. This is a really big one because I think that a lot of people get too concerned, especially really early in their career, about like doing everything perfect, doing everything right, or like being right, feeling like because you work in the tech side of the company, that people expect you to have all the right answers or to pretty much know how everything works. Like there are plenty of times where as a software developer, I was asked to help people fix their computers in like completely separate parts of the company because they just thought that that's what I did. Right. So people might not understand your job or your role and things like that. And they might have unrealistic expectations of what you can do, but don't take that as an opportunity to feel like you have to know everything, you have to be perfect, or you can't make a mistake, or that you're going to get fired if you make a mistake, because that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, asking questions and being willing to make a mistake and learn from it are actually really good traits to be known for within a company, and just personally for you as part of your career, being that type of coworker, teammate, employee, because it shows a willingness to learn and to improve and get better. Right now, of course, don't just run out and look for mistakes to make, especially like really obvious avoidable mistakes. Like that's definitely not what I'm saying at all. But you know the the willingness to go out and take chances, though, and learn from mistakes when they do inevitably happen, because everybody's had mistakes happen at work, and there's almost like very few things that just can't be undone or that can't be corrected or can't be fixed. Now, of course, you don't want to be responsible for a huge problem, right? That negatively impacts lots of other people. But what I found is that it's really hard for one person in a well-run company to really like make a huge mistake that negatively impacts the entire company too bad. Like there could be damage that comes from a mistake that you made, but again, like if the company is run and organized and structured pretty well, it's hard for one person to take down the entire department or the entire company and things like that. So you can't be afraid to make mistakes just because you work in tech, or just because you're early in your career, or because you don't have a computer science background, or because this is your first job in tech. Like, don't feel like you can't talk in meetings. Don't feel like you can't ask questions. Don't feel like you're going to say something dumb. Don't feel like you're going to make a mistake and get fired, because likely that's not the case. You'd be a lot worse off if you weren't willing to ask those questions, take those chances, make those mistakes, because that would then show that you're kind of just coasting and you're comfortable and you're not really aiming or trying to, do anything or take any chances. So that's what I would say about this one. Just don't be afraid to make mistakes, because those can really help you develop a really strong identity at work as a teammate, as a coworker, just being known as a person who is always willing to get better from mistakes that they did make, or learning from mistakes that happen. It might not even be your mistake. It could be a mistake somebody else made, or a mistake that happened on your team, and you're able to proactively learn from that, so that in the future how something was handled in a different situation, and how you can potentially help avoid it, things like that. So don't be afraid of this one. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. I definitely can understand how it feels. especially if you're getting into software engineering and you're like early in your career and there's like so many things you don't know. Even for me in product, there are definitely things that I don't know. But I think that's every role, and I think that's part of working in tech. And I think a big reason why people get into tech is because they're typically self starters. They're self managed, very what is the word? They're very um intrinsically motivated people. So you don't necessarily need, a mistake to happen to teach you something. You don't need somebody pushing you or watching over your back or like micromanaging your work. That's what got you into the job. That's what got you into tech, is that ability to go out and be proactive and learn things and learn on your own and learn how you learn too. So mistakes are going to just naturally happen for people as literally a part of the learning process. And it's better to embrace that early and often, as opposed to trying to play catch up down the road and ask questions once you've been there for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, a year. Start out from day one being willing to make mistakes and ask questions so that people can actually see that you actually take that knowledge and information they share with you and you use it to become better at your job and better in your role. So don't be afraid to make mistakes early in your tech career. So what we got? That is number 8. Cool. Moving along, moving along. So number 9, we've got comparing yourself too much to others. So I feel like this actually ties in pretty well with that last one, being afraid to make mistakes, because comparing yourself to others can be really detrimental. I did this when I was in coding boot camp. I felt like there was a guy who he already spoke multiple verbal languages. And so I felt like he was picking up the concepts of computer science and coding and everything that we were learning in our boot camp a lot more easily than I was and a lot of other people were. And that made me really sort of intimidated. It made me feel like maybe I wasn't cut out to be there. Like if I couldn't think as sharp and as fast as this guy, maybe it wasn't meant for me to code. And that became, during my first 2 weeks of coding boot camp, like a really big, like personal challenge, I guess, for me, or a personal hurdle, because I really allowed that to negatively impact my outlook on coding boot camp and like the class and what I was learning, how I was learning. And yeah, I just it really kind of got to me mentally, and it made it more challenging to kind of learn things because I felt like I was just naturally doing bad, and this guy was doing so well, and he was picking up on everything. And why didn't I get it this fast, right? So comparing yourself to others is a really bad mental space to be in, because everybody's journey, especially even into tech, is completely different, right? And I think that's one of the beauties of working in tech, is that so many people have or took a different path to getting where they are today. And that's because we all learn different, we all have different life experiences, we all have different backgrounds. And so it's more important for you to learn how you learn and just focus on getting better at the things that that you need to get better at, because everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and what somebody else is really good at you could be really bad at, and vice versa, right? And then not only that, but everybody's brain learns differently. And so, like I said, it's more important for you to kind of identify the way that you learn and where your skills gaps and knowledge gaps are, as opposed to just focusing on what somebody else does better than you, or focusing on how much better somebody is at their role, or how much more they're getting recognized for their work. Now, there might be lessons to be learned in how that person is doing their job and how it's valued by the company and things like that, that you can, sort of either observe and learn, or even talk to them about it if you feel comfortable. But to actually compare in the sense of, you know, evaluating yourself based on what somebody else, exceeds at or is really good at, is not really productive, right? Because no matter how hard you try, you could never be that other person. And you could look at that as a negative thing if you want to, but I think it's more helpful to look at it as a positive, in that you are your own individual person and you have your own strengths that you bring to the team, which is why they hired you. And so, just learning yourself more, trusting yourself, and trusting that you will learn how to fill the gaps that you're aware of, right? And you'll eventually, if you don't already, become better at learning how you learn things. So going back to doing side projects or like getting real world experience, maybe outside of work, but there's a lot of different ways that you can supplement and learn, the gaps in the knowledge areas that you need to fill in a completely different way than somebody else might learn. So, focus more, I would say, in this one on learning yourself and how you learn, as opposed to really comparing yourself to other people and using that as like a negative or positive barometer for like where you are. So I guess the inverse is true too. Like don't compare yourself to what somebody else does in their role and be like, well, I'm doing way better than them and I do this and I do that. So therefore, like I deserve a promotion or I deserve more pay or I deserve this person's job. Like just because you're comparing your own internal feelings of your performance against somebody else, like even that is just as unproductive and unhelpful as comparing somebody to kind of put yourself down and say like, oh, there's so much better than me, like I'll never be that great, or I'll never learn this, or I've never done that before, and just feeling like that makes you like lesser or worse in your role, right? So just something to keep in mind on that one. Not comparing yourself to others, I think, is a really big mistake people can make early in their career that can beat down their confidence in their own roles and their own skills. All right, so what is that, number 9? So we got a couple more here, and then we'll get into wrapping this one up. So let's see, number 10, not having a growth mindset. So I would say this one also kind of overlaps with the last point of comparing yourself to others, because if you don't have a growth mindset working in tech, it can quickly become very robotic and mundane, and you can easily stop increasing your value as an employer, and or I'm sorry, as an employee, and especially to future employers for like new jobs. So if you stay in one company in one role and you don't really plan on growing your skills, learning different things outside of work, or being exposed to other things outside of work, or even just taking opportunities at work to improve and do things that you haven't done before, like not having that mindset that you're going to continue to grow is going to literally limit your opportunities after your current job. Is going to limit what you are able to bring to a future job, which is going to therefore limit what you're able to make in future jobs. So a growth mindset is important to not only getting those promotions, title changes, raises, but also getting better jobs and just helping you with overall job security. Because, like I said before, most people are in tech because they're self learners, self starters, they're intrinsically motivated people. A lot of people are good at teaching themselves things. They don't necessarily need a teacher or somebody to sit down and give them a manual or a book or a step by step to go out and figure things out. That's a lot of the reason why a lot of people have jobs in tech that do, right? So for you to have this growth mindset, is going to be really important that people see your trajectory. So it's not about where you are today, but where they could see you being in the company, what role they could see you having, and then that also is going to open you up to having, like I said, job security, because the more you're able to grow and learn, you'll pick up on other things to help you secure jobs, even if not in your role, in other roles within tech, because you have a growth mindset. Because we work so closely together in a lot of senses in tech that it's not hard to pick up on the nuances of another role or another person's skill set or job, like what makes them good at what they do. Because again, there's a lot of different overlap between some of the roles in tech that work closely together. So, the more you have a growth mindset and are willing to just be open to all the things that you don't know and to see the possibilities of things that are out there, right? Whether it's within your role, outside your role, whatever the case is for you, and your specific career goals, is super helpful to just constantly be thinking about ways that you can grow and improve, because that's just going to be a required thing anyway from the job itself. So you want this to also benefit you outside of work as much as possible, as well as in your professional role that you currently have. So not having a growth mindset is a really big one that can limit people, I feel, and get them stuck in a pigeonhole, especially early on in their careers. Like you can overstay your welcome at one job too long. And because you're just focused on getting your paycheck, going home, enjoying your PTO, enjoying your time off, holidays, working remotely or whatever, and not reinvesting that time into new valuable skill sets, like I said, it can just pigeonhole you to where even though you might work at a job for like 3, 4, 5, 6 years, you've been pigeonholed in what you were able to do in that role. And so, you need just as much time outside of that job, getting other skills and experiences because you weren't having a growth mindset while you were in that role. So just something to think about. Having a growth mindset is super valuable. It's going to help you, not just in your current job, but, in other roles in the future as well. So these last two we'll hit really quickly and we'll go ahead and wrap this stream up. So ignoring best practices and processes is another one. We kind of talked about earlier, like documenting things and getting good at documentation. But I think this one is specifically talking about just, again, every company is going to have a certain way that they view your role being, basically. That's going to involve different processes. Like, of course, there's like industry standard things, and there's like best practices for a certain industry, which is going to also compare based on where you are geographically, the company you work for, the type of work that you do. So all these things vary, even though there's always considered industry standards for most things. So it's important that you understand how your company views a role or a certain process and not overlook those details, because again, these are things that kind of go back to, we talked about the company culture, and not really going against the company culture grain too heavily, right, in ways that aren't productive. So in this sense, ignoring best practices and processes that exist within the company are surefire ways to just make your life harder. And again, just because you think you have a better way of doing something, or you might feel like you have a more productive way of getting something done, there's always a time and a place and a way to bring something up, to communicate that to leadership, and pretty much get buy-in around something, right? So not just feeling like because your way is better, you go and you do it and you ignore all the precedents that the company has, set for us, the way certain things are done, documented, the way the processes happen, and you just come up with, a better way that you think, something should happen. And so you just run off and go do that on your own. This is, again, just a surefire way to just create more problems for yourself and to make life harder for you, even if you are doing really good quality work. Again, you want to make sure that if you have a reason to go against existing processes and the way things are done at your company, there's just a way to go about doing it that you can actually be seen in a positive light and see this change as having a positive impact for the company, as opposed to it seeming like you're being rebellious or just doing things your own way because you don't care about the existing practices or the existing processes. So don't ignore those, and if you want to change the way that things work, there's a way. Find out what the proper way to your company is to sort of run that through the right processes and people to get implemented. But yeah, just blatantly ignoring practices and processes at your job are a surefire way to just really make your life harder, for lack of a better word. So let's move on to the very last one, then we'll go ahead and wrap the stream up. This last one is not managing your own time is a really huge thing that can really put your career like at risk, or your job at risk for sure, because you know a lot of jobs in tech are self-managed in a lot of ways. You're not typically going to have, unless you have a unfortunate situation where you are getting micromanaged, but in a lot of cases, you aren't necessarily getting micromanaged in the same way that in other jobs you might be visibly within eyesight of, a manager who's literally looking over your shoulder at your performance, or really documenting or monitoring, every single input and output of your performance. A lot of times what I found personally is that a lot of tech jobs have a much more sort of lax management style, and it's more about autonomy and people being self-managed and self-organizing that really makes remote teams or hybrid teams really thrive. And so people are relying on each other to be reliable and be good at their job and be dependable coworkers, right? So that even if something isn't done by end of day today or something like that, I can trust that whatever deadline and date you give me and you tell me something's going to be done by, I can trust based on your past performance that this is something that I can count on. That okay, they said this is going to be done by this day and time, so I know it'll be done by that day and that time, right? And so just trusting that when I hand something off to you or you hand something off to me, or whenever you do work, people view your work as quality. When you write a document, people trust that the details are there, that it's reliable, it's factual, it's correct, right? That you've consulted the right people, informed the right people, and all of that just goes back to being good at self-organizing and self-managing your own time. So in a lot of cases, like I do stand up every day, and a lot of other teams, depending on your role, you might also be a part of stand-ups, and you have to know kind of, what you did yesterday, what you are doing today. And you might even have like team meetings where you go over things for like your plans for the week or like a week by week basis and the outlook for the week, right? Or you might recap what you did the previous week. So you want to have ways of documenting, all the different things that you either did or have upcoming or that you plan to do, and just have a really, good way of self organizing all the different tasks and responsibilities that you have in managing your own deadlines and things like that. Because in a lot of cases, there are personal productivity tips and tricks that, work differently for everybody. And everybody has their own way of doing this, self organizing, this self management. And, that's why I think it's important that you come up with a really structured and a really easy way of managing your time that works for you. Because if not, you can easily find yourself forgetting things, not getting things done, missing deadlines. And again, that's just a very bad way to, or really, I would say a bad habit to build as you get started in your tech career, because the problems as you get further in your career are only going to grow. And if you don't have kind of the infrastructure of how you work to make sure you can manage bigger problems, then they become very, very challenging problems to navigate, right? Or you just might not have a job. So you just want to make sure that you build a productivity system, patterns, habits that just work for you and that help you self manage your own time and your own responsibilities. Because a lot of times, like I said, no matter what role you're in, you might start the day off with one particular game plan and you might say, like, hey, I'm aiming to get this done today. But then, I find that there's a ton of different things based on certain meetings or certain initiatives or certain requests that come up throughout the day that your entire game plan could change, your priority list can change, and you might have to, assist other people on some things or do things that aren't necessarily a part of your day-to-day job function, but still required, that you help out with or that you do. So these are, all things you want to have your own way of keeping track so that you know what you did, what you're working on, what you plan to do. And yeah, just have some way of managing your own time and deadlines and all your work so that you can just comfortably know that you have a system of not forgetting things. You're not just relying on mental notes, because that becomes like impossible to keep up with. You cannot keep all the information from all your meetings just in your brain, unless, I mean, maybe you can. I know I sure can't. So yeah, just having your own personal process that is going to work for you is a super helpful thing. So just managing your own time, or therefore like not managing your own time, is a huge mistake that you should really avoid making early in your tech career. So if you are just now joining or you're watching this on the playback, this entire stream was really just 12 things that I feel like personally are helpful to avoid doing early in your tech career. And I'm really curious what y'all think about it. Because like I said, this entire list was all things that have, oh, of course, somebody will call me right now. But like I was saying, y'all, this whole stream was a list of things that I personally experienced, either firsthand I've gone through or I've witnessed happen at, jobs I've worked at. So I'm curious, as y'all watch some of the playback, drop down in the comments, like let me know, did I miss anything, or like what are some things that you would recommend or you've encountered in your tech career early on that people should just really avoid doing as they're trying to build their career up in tech. So other than that, my name is Darian. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. I'll see y'all in the next stream. Peace.